mode. The acquisition market is very difficult these days. Prices are very high, so it's more expensive to buy now than to build. So that's good news for folks like Tony and others who are in the development game. We just opened a second new building in the last couple of years in Shelton, Connecticut. Our first was Bedford, New Hampshire. We've got, we just broke ground in a new building in Lincoln, Mass. We expect to break ground by the end of the year in Woburn. And we have a dozen other sites, some Massachusetts, some Connecticut, some Metro New York, that we expect to break ground on over the next couple of years. So we're also looking at acquisitions, but again, they're very difficult to do right now. So this is the most active we've seen the development market be in a while. And I think it's reflective of the fact that nationally, the industry's performance is very strong, even stronger in the Northeast and in Boston. So occupancies are high and rates are high and penetration is comparatively low relative to other markets. So a lot of folks look at those statistics and want to build new product. Hopefully most of them will be very successful. There's also a lot of capital chasing the industry right now, which is good and bad. But the development activity nationally is really sort of very market to market. So we're actually one of the more active development markets right now in the country. Texas is very active, and some parts of the West Coast are active. I talked to some friends in other parts of the country. They said, nobody's building anything here. So it really is not a national wave. It is really a more market-specific activity, and the Northeast is certainly one of the areas where there's comparatively a lot of development activity currently happening.
Great. Anybody else want to?
Good morning. I'm Peter Mullin from Senior Living Residences, and we're a smaller operator. We've got 12 properties all in Massachusetts, and we've been at it for 25 years. I agree with Tom. We have a building we opened in January. We are opening a building in this coming January. So this is after several years of really no new development. And I think there is some pent-up demand. The economic crisis definitely put the brakes on new development, so there are still a lot of underserved markets in New England, in Massachusetts, and as Tom said, when you talk to people outside the country, outside New England and the rest of the country, they say, you know, it's a high barrier to entry development location with pent-up demand. It's a great place for people to be looking to do new deals. The other thing that I would mention is that on the capital side, REITs are the biggest thing in our industry right now in terms of the capital side. They are doubling and tripling in size through acquisitions of each other. So they've seen the long-term economics, they're long-term owners of real estate, they've seen the long-term trend, and they are very bullish on operators identifying local markets. And I guess the other thing that I would say is, to us, markets are very local. They're like 5 or 7 miles. You know, you can look at a group of towns that have 2 or 3 assisted livings and still say, we want to build in that, you know, that general region, because those, you know, psychological and local boundaries will make projects work very well 4 or 5 miles apart if they're in different towns. So there's a lot of room to grow for the industry. And the last point I'll make is we're starting to look at, and you're starting to see, special care or Alzheimer's care development in smaller projects, 50 to 65 unit projects, scales much smaller than the average 80 to 90 unit assisted living. That was sort of the first wave of development. So we think that's a positive thing. It's sort of a specialty, it's an underserved population, and it's increasingly being served in a product that works exactly for those residents, as opposed to a unit within a larger building that has trouble with economy of scale and being able to kind of scale up and serve 50 or 60 people with dementia. So.
Well, my name is Tony Papantonis. I'm president of Nauset Construction, and we've been involved with numerous senior care facility construction projects over the past several years. I can attest to the fact that, you know, between 2004 and say 2008, there were, I'd say, 50% of our business was construction of new senior care facilities, and then, like all of a sudden, the market just stopped drastically, at least for us. And now we recognize, especially over the past couple of years, that trend is definitely moving upward. We're seeing more projects and more opportunities. In terms of construction costs are really based on many factors, and it includes the GDP, unemployment rate, consumer confidence, and they call it the ABI, which is the Architectural Building Index. And those trends are definitely pushing construction costs higher. And just from January 2014 to now, generally we're seeing trends or costs, the index increasing by about 3.5% to 4%. And it's projected that those trends will continue at the same percent for 2014 and 2015 and 2016. So people that are planning for projects should take that into account. But it's definitely a market that has a lot of potential, and I think from a contractor standpoint, I know many of you out here are contractors, it's an exciting opportunity for us.
Sure, thank you. We still have you, I know you're running out. So if you wanted to, Emily wanted to amplify a little more on, I thought it was interesting, the Globe article, and seemed to raise the issue that the state was maybe talking about either adding the staff or trying to increase its regulation. And I know that's always been an issue for the industry, concern that maybe some of the success has been, or the ability to expand and offer some things that it's been able to do has been based on the freedom of action not being, separate from the state, but not being sucked into the Medicaid, Medicare system and all the regulations involved with that. Is that separate from that what the state is looking at? Or would that still be a concern, having maybe if the state was trying to ramp up its oversight or getting kind of involved in that more deeply in that system, or not, I guess?
Certainly, the state has been thinking about adding regulations to assisted living over the past year and a half, and we've participated in a collaborative process regarding that. So I think certainly as the more and more people are choosing assisted living, and as more and more development happens, they certainly are thinking about what will the future be looking like, and are there things that need to be changed and evaluated. We have a unique opportunity in Massachusetts because we are a very residential setting, very residential model, and we have always felt that the regulatory structure gives consumers choice, but also safeguards their well-being, and that there are a variety of requirements. So through this regulatory process, we have certainly supported many things that they're thinking about. It hasn't taken place yet, so we're still waiting to see, and actually I'm going to a meeting about that momentarily. So.
Sure, so it sounds like it's underway, and as you're pointing out, you're saying, look, those are tragic cases, but it's not reflective of what's happening in the industry.
Yes, seniors are living in our residences. They are independent. They are getting support. They are getting services, and certainly there are incidents that happen. The state will come and evaluate those immediately. There is oversight now. There are major safety requirements. There are major training requirements. So there is a lot in place to make sure that people are safe and getting the services that they need.
All right, thank you. What are the areas, now that we're talking generally new projects and construction, what are the, are we looking at the traditional format, or are you looking at maybe some of the increased demand happening in these Alzheimer facilities? What are you building as you're adding facilities? What's the makeup and mix of it?
I think for us, if you asked us our typical project, it would be 90 units with perhaps 25 or 30 special care or Alzheimer's units within that building, and that area of the building would typically be secured, meaning you only come or go from it using keypad access or secure doors, which allows people who live within the unit then to move around freely within that secure area, and allows the staff not to be preoccupied on people being near the door. So we do try to create a neighborhood within the building that once you're in it, you don't have to worry about security anymore. You've gone through what we need to do to protect people from, wandering or leaving the building, and then it exists on its own within the building. So our typical project would be that 90 units with a 30-unit Alzheimer's component within it. But then, as I said, we are looking at, and several have been done, all memory care, single story, which is nice for Alzheimer's care, in the 50 to 60 unit range. There have probably been 7 or 8 of those in the state in the last couple of years, so there's a lot going on in that.
We too are building, something very similar to what Peter described, the 90 unit with the third roughly for Alzheimer's. We're also doing several different things. We're actually finishing out a CCRC right now. But actually our first project that Benchmark opened 18 years ago was a freestanding Alzheimer's, and we manage 8 of them now, in addition to having over 40 of our communities with Alzheimer's components. It is interesting that several of our competitors have been doing, as you mentioned, 7 or 8, that sounds about right, of opening just Alzheimer's communities. And I think that's because they look at some of the statistics about occupancies and the growth in demand for Alzheimer's, and I think that's interesting that they're doing that, and they seem to be working well. They're nice communities, and but we're doing something sort of similar to what Peter described.
Tony, what are you doing? What are you building now? Are you building any exclusively assisted living, or what?
Well, we do a variety of assisted living facilities and long-term care facilities. A couple things that we're seeing in terms of trends. If I look back to when I started the business, years and years ago, too long ago, it's quite a difference between, if you compare the facilities that were being constructed, back in the early to mid-90s versus what we're seeing today. I mean, what we're involved with is both new and renovation type projects. And so the trend, just some of the design features that we're seeing is whereas before, they were very institutional facilities, VCT flooring, painted chipboard. Now you walk into these facilities and it's really similar to a 5-star hotel. I mean, it's incredible. So we're seeing some of our projects, or a lot of these are converting facilities that had quad or triple or double occupancy units to single beds, private bathrooms. We're pulling out tubs, putting in shower units. We're creating a more home-like setting. So the larger complexes are being designed and built more into smaller sub-communities. Like I said before, the setting is more hospitality-driven. So that's, like I said, changing out the VCT to carpet, a warmer atmosphere, much higher grade finishes. We're seeing higher ceilings, expansive windows, a lot of thought and preparation in terms of lighting, how to light the facilities. Another trend is really utilizing outdoor spaces, whether it's secured courtyards, water features. We've been involved with the facility that has fire pits, and then we're seeing additions for overnight visitation, as well as abundant and vast common spaces. So the trend is maybe smaller units, single units, but much more open space. And I think that it's really to promote residential interaction, and that seems to be the trend. Getting the residents and the families to interact with one another, as opposed to sitting in their units watching TV.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the kind of, as you're describing, kind of some places feeling like a 5-star hotel, a much different feel and quality. It costs more to obviously build them, right? How are like Tom or Peter? How do the economics of that work? Obviously, I mean, the more money that goes into the finishes. I mean, that's obviously making a more expensive product or not. I mean, what's the theory behind that, I guess, in terms of who you're attracting and what the market is?
I'll try that because I haven't achieved 40 units plus yet. That is the balance for us. We started in the industry trying to serve the middle market, basically coming to it feeling like an elderly person or a family with a 90-year-old parent with inexhaustible resources sort of had an issue but not a problem. They could find a way to get the services they needed. Somehow they had the money. So the middle market is in fact the place where this issue becomes really critical, because we're not fundamentally a real estate play for our families or our residents. They don't want to live in an institution. They don't need to pay for and live in a 5-star hotel either. Some do want that, and that's fine. The tension has been as you increase the amenities that are out there in the market, and I would say that assisted living in Massachusetts initially, going back 20 years, served the upper end of the market. The initial development was at the higher end and became the standard. And then the tension for the rest of our existence will be how to bring that to a middle or moderate market individual. It can't be the same building. We don't think it has to be the same building. We think the focus on common area, the lack of focus on the square footage of the residential unit, if it's offset by common area that's used by everyone and used by us, with our staff and associates to create community and opportunity for activity, that's where we should be spending the money. But I think it's increasingly difficult, and it's something that we keep pushing the industry. What about affordable assisted living? How do we do that? How do we create not a second tier of product that you look at and say, oh, well, that must be an affordable assisted living because it doesn't look like the rest of them. How do we do that and convince the consumer that what matters is the 65% of our operating budget that we spend on staff? It's all about labor for us, and it's not about necessarily the building, although it has to be attractive. So I think it remains to be seen how we create a product that really is affordable across the board, and yet is home-like, is non-institutional, is where people want to live. And that's our biggest tension, really, the Globe article and others. People start by saying, I can't live at home anymore, or Mom, you can't live at home anymore. Then the question is, well, okay, where do you go? And that's the tension that we have. Consumers, the people who live with us, want to stay where they've moved. They live with us, they consider it home, they need services to be brought to them so that they don't need to go to a nursing home prematurely. And that puts us as operators in a tough position, because every day we're trying to work with families who are saying, we don't want my mother to leave. We have to figure out how to make this continue to work because we're happy here. And that we filled the void 25 years ago, and the void in a way keeps growing because nursing homes get more and more acute. They less and less want people who are going to live there for a long time, and here we are, people consider it a good place to be living, but they have increasing needs. And how do we do that? How do we work with the regulator to continue to be the answer for the consumer? And that's not the construction cost answer, I'm sorry, but I think that is a real tension for us, is middle market assisted living.
Sure, no, that's interesting. Yeah, Tom?
I think I'd agree with everything Peter said. We have some buildings that look like 5-star hotels and some that don't. It really depends on the market and how we want to position the community. So, and the rest of Peter's going, I think the topic of affordable assisted living would be a great other discussion topic at some point. So,
yeah. In terms of demographics in the region, what's the capacities left in, like, for example, the Boston area for new projects? Are we getting anywhere near the capacity mark overall, or where do we stand now?
the demographics are sort of a little bit intoxicating because everybody takes a look at senior living and says, oh my God, it's guaranteed success. And the fact is that right now the 65 plus demographic, while it is growing faster than other parts of the population, it's actually not growing really fast. It doesn't really pick up for a while. And our average age at entrance into our assisted living communities is in the mid-80s. So the baby boomers just started turning 65 a couple of years ago. So the demographic growth is growing for sure now, but the real growth is still a ways away. So everybody thinks, oh my God, senior housing, well, we can put it any place and there's a demand for it. And that's just simply not true. Within the Boston area, I think as Peter said, it's really a very local thing. So it really does depend on the 3 to 5 to 7 mile radius to really figure out where there are pockets of demand, but there are a number. I think the biggest opportunity for our industry actually, right now if you look nationally, the penetration, meaning the percent of people who are living in senior living that are over, I think it's a 65 number if I'm recalling correctly, is about 12%. The biggest opportunity we have actually isn't finding more places to build that take it up to the 12%. It's actually finding out how to increase penetration from 12% to 18, 20, 25. And that's by getting rid of the stigma of senior living that still exists in many people's minds, notwithstanding some of the 5-star hotel appearances. It's more flexibility to provide more services. That's actually the biggest growth opportunity for the industry, is increasing the percentage of people we serve, not just finding more places to serve to the existing percentage, if that makes sense. But is there opportunity in the Boston area? Absolutely. Is it a ticket to build wherever you want? Absolutely not. And it's a very local, very specific, and where you position properties as 5-star hotels in one market, you wouldn't in another, and so on. So that's the answer.
Sure, well, that's a lot. That's a big answer. So the 12%. So that is nationally, or
Yes.
And what are we? And what would the Boston area? Are we below or above 12%?
Well, the numbers that, relatively speaking, the penetration, meaning the percent of people who live in senior living communities in the Boston metro area relative to others, we're slightly below the national average. So if you believe that there's no reason we shouldn't be at the national average, that alone suggests there's opportunity to build some more.
And these are people that live in assisted living or
Yes.
senior care or
Yes.
in that spectrum.
Yes. But it's hard to do in Boston, it's more expensive in Boston. I'm not sure that's really necessarily a sound analysis to just sort of leave it at, if we just went to the average, what would that be? But,
Right. You're saying it could be even more, you'd like to see 18, 20%?
no.
Sorry.
What I was saying was that we have somewhat lower penetration in the Boston metro area than the national average.
Yep.
But the whole national average is understated if you believe that the growth opportunity for the industry is increasing penetration nationally by sort of having people think about the product differently, I guess is what I'm saying.
Sure. Yeah.
I just add one thing. I was on a task force for several years that looked at this, and Massachusetts has a higher penetration rate for skilled nursing facilities than the rest of the country. So we have this conundrum in Massachusetts and New England where we have a higher percentage of penetration for skilled nursing occupancy and less in assisted living, which sort of, I think what Tom was alluding to, there's still this education, there's still this understanding of where assisted living fits in the continuum for a family who has a parent or a loved one who can't live at home anymore, is in their mid-80s, and the default has historically been a nursing home. Sorry, Mom, you're leaving home, you're going to a nursing home. You know, for 20 years now in Massachusetts, which isn't a long time in the healthcare continuum world, there's been this thing of assisted living. A lot of consumers don't even know it exists, so skip right over it and go to a nursing home probably sooner than they have to. I will disclaim, a nursing home is the exact place to be if that's the level of service you need. There's no amount of nursing home diminishment in my mind. The question is, are there options for a senior and their family along the way in the aging process? And the art is to figure out what setting is the right one along that path of, you know, hopefully 7 or 10 years of aging after you haven't been able to, you know, live on your own as a parent. So I think that's where the opportunity is for people and the general public. And I was tempted to ask people who raised their hands if they thought they understood the distinction between assisted living and a nursing home. Because my best friend said to me the other day, well, in your nursing home, so I'm like, oh my God, you've known me for 25 years. I'm not in the nursing home business, you know. But his parent is only 72. They haven't gotten there yet. You know, our educated consumer learns about us once and never thinks about us again. You know, it's not even like college. They only have 2 parents, or if they're lucky, or 1, and then they're well educated, but they're not a consumer anymore. So there's a lot for us to do about educating people about what questions to be asking and where to be looking to help solve their family issue.
I just want to add a couple things. Concerning costs, one of the things that we seem to be getting more involved with, although I don't know how much real valid information we provide, is when it comes to construction costs, this is certainly the initial cost of actually building a building, but then we're getting more involved with conversations about operating costs and what we can do to minimize operating costs to, I guess, offset the higher cost of construction. So some of the things that we're seeing in these pre-construction meetings is, you know, use of photovoltaic and solar panels is a concept that we're getting more involved with. Certainly, adaptive reuse of assisted living of existing buildings as opposed to building new. Obviously, higher more energy efficient HVAC systems and much more extensive or expansive lighting systems with lighting controls, and all those you know, equate to. And obviously, we have consultants and design engineers working alongside of us that kind of compare the operating costs versus and how they function versus new construction and how that all equates. So that's some of the things that we're getting more involved with. And you know, it varies depending on the facility. We've even been involved with a project that's entertaining using a green roof to assist with the stormwater runoff. So there's other concepts out there other than, you know, here's the projects, here's the blueprints, what's the cost? You know, it's getting a little more deeper involved with that type of sustainable design.
Tom and Peter, are you looking at incorporating more energy efficient features, or is that kind of old hat for you now at this point, or new, or even?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of the kinds of things that Tony mentioned. We've of the last 2 buildings we've opened are LEED certified buildings. We're doing lighting retrofits in a lot of our properties. We're doing a whole host of things up and down to make them more efficient and more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing that it occurred to me as Tony was speaking, a lot of the inventory in the industry is now over 10 years old. So renovations, major refurbishments, bringing them to what's evolved as a model of assisted living versus what was the model in the mid-90s when a lot of the buildings were constructed, is sort of a coming issue for the industry. Just looking at asset age and what you do. Generally, everybody who has them wants to keep them as assisted living, but the question is, what do we do on the reserve replacement or the renovation front to stay competitive?
What is the permitting process like at this point for assisted living projects compared to, or comparatively speaking, looking at, you know, office projects or residential projects that can, especially on the local level, that can often be a tension there. Is it easier to get assisted living permitted, or are you welcomed by towns maybe because I think there's less traffic, or do you have similar issues?
Yes, we're welcomed by towns. I think, you know, definitely over the past couple of years, there is a growing understanding of what it is we're trying to do, sort of what the benefit to the town is to either rewrite zoning or hear appeals about bringing this amenity to town. There's always discussion about, you know, well, we're not going to be a drag on the education, but you have a lot of fire calls or ambulance, you know, there's a lot of tension. But I think increasingly when you're introducing yourself to a community, there are starting to be a couple of selectmen, a couple of board members who have experience with assisted living and realize it's a huge amenity to a town, that seniors don't have to leave the town when they sell their home, which is great. You're bringing in, you know, helping housing values, but there really is a commitment to want to offer seniors the opportunity to leave their house but stay in town. And I think increasingly that's being weighed by the boards in town, saying, well, wait a minute, we want to make this work because we don't want every senior who sells their house in town to have to move across the line to the one next door. We're not doing our job. So I think that has started to catch up with us as we go through the permitting, but obviously all the usual concerns about traffic and lighting and density come in. But I think we've demonstrated over the years we're a pretty good addition to the economics and the community of a town that has an assisted living built. So I think we do have that going for us on the permitting front.
Does it help that it's for an older population, you're not having to, at least you're not having to deal with issues of school costs and things like that, or they're not looking at those issues?
Yeah, I think Peter mentioned that towns like the use because we don't add kids to schools, we generate less traffic, we pay taxes, so it's a more development impact-friendly use. The trick right now in a market like this is our ability to pay to buy the land relative to multifamily developers or condo developers and the like. So we can't afford as much per unit as they can, but when we are able to tie up a piece of property relative to other uses like office or multifamily, we do compare favorably. You said, is it easier? I guess easier isn't the word I would, it's still very difficult, but maybe comparatively it is somewhat easier, but it's still very difficult.
And how is that? That's interesting. One of the land issue. What is the availability of land right there? It sounds like there's a lot of competition for what's available out there.
Yes, there is. So it's hard to find a good piece of land in certain markets in particular. In other areas it's easier, of course, but in markets where there's a lot of demand for sites for multifamily or condo developers, that's very hard for us to compete with. So these things ebb and flow. So there'll be times in a few years where the multifamily condo developers won't be building and we'll be able to do it then, but we'll see. Right now it's a time of great demand for those folks. It makes it harder for us.
Would you be building more now if there were more land available or that didn't have that competition right now?
We probably wouldn't be building more. We might be building in slightly different places.
Okay.
But
so you're not always able to get the ideal site that you would want.
I guess I'd say there might be different markets we might be choosing to build in.
Okay. You just can't find it.
Right.
Any markets you want to name there?
No. But thanks for asking.
And Peter, how about you? What are you looking at there with the land issues?
Yeah, I think it's when we like land in a particular community, we're regularly outbid or out offered by rental market developer or condos. And I think the dynamic is, where you can economically buy land, is that where there are enough people to move into your building to service the debt and make the deal work. And I think it is a growing issue, and I think if you looked at, I forget what numbers Emily said, but I think if you just put pins on a map, you would see the density of the assisted living in Massachusetts between 128 and just a little bit west of 495. So this big swath here, because once you get inside 128 and you're paying Newton or Boston or Cambridge prices, you're being outbid by a 300-unit rental apartment developer who's paying, for us, triple, the number we would pay for the raw land. So the real issue, going back to communities needing assisted living as a resource for their residents, how do you get into markets like Cambridge and Boston and Newton at a level where you don't have to be a 5-star hotel? Because while those towns might command 5-star hotel or 300-unit apartment building raw land prices, not everyone who lives in that town can live in a 5-star hotel. So there's this real dynamic, and I don't know if over time, towns start and municipalities start to say, we actually want to promote assisted living as an option in this community. So there are parts of our planning map where it will only be assisted living, and the economics there are to encourage assisted living rather than encourage, the highest and best or highest bidder. Maybe we actually want to construct something that promotes economically how we can get assisted living to come into this area, because we did a couple early on projects in Boston and Cambridge, but it's very tough to do them now. Back in the 90s, you could find ways to do it. Right now, there are people who would say, don't bother spending your time because you're going to be outbid in any of those markets. Or the price, once you pay that, the price you're going to have to charge the consumer would make it non-economical.
Tom, what are you finding inside 128?
I agree with Peter's description. I think getting into some of the really inner Boston or close to Boston markets is very expensive and not economic today. We're further out, not quite at 128. It's more possible, but it's still competitive. So we're about to start construction on one in Woburn, as I mentioned. I can think of properties that opened in Wellesley and other places, but it's going further in. It's very difficult.
And what are the demographics you're looking for, densities? I mean, just in general, when you're looking at a community, looking to build in it. I think Tom, or you were mentioning maybe there's some, or maybe Peter, some communities you could have, you might even see already 2 or 3 facilities and there's room for a 4th, but others you might not, may not be enough room for 1. So what do you look at when you're scouting communities and looking at potential?
I think the initial math or analysis is an over 75 population. You pick an income that might be, $50,000, home values that are, sufficient that the sale of them would produce the necessary income. And then, we would look at an untapped market, let's call it that, as sort of screened, an untapped market that might be twice the number of units we were looking to build. So if we were looking to do 80 units, you'd want, maybe the screened available population to be, maybe double that. But you get into the penetration, and do the consumers in this market really understand assisted living, or maybe they really do, and the fact that the 2 that are in that town are only 85% occupied, that tells you that somehow that math doesn't exactly work. But that's what we're generally looking at. We think you probably, to do that, need in the town you're looking at, maybe a population of 25,000 or something like that. You get much smaller than that, you're starting to look at, are there a couple of communities that, when knitted together, create a market? Not any one of them that might be able to support an 80-unit assisted living, but together as 3, as a tri-county, tri-town kind of, which a lot of communities operate that way. There are a couple of towns that are always said or mentioned together, and the shopping patterns and all that cross over them, readily. You're saying, okay, well, that's a cohesive market, I understand. I've drawn, it's not a circle anymore, it kind of is the boundaries of these couple of towns, but there's enough people in there. So that's what we look at, and at the same time, we have a market where we operate 2 communities. A recent market study said it was overbedded by 300 units. We have 2 full projects, and so it's a very inexact science. There is, I just mentioned on this, I don't know if Tom's seen it, but this in-migration idea that there are people who don't live in the market area who will actually move into a building was a strange notion 20 years ago, and there were some people nationally who were doing it, and that's kind of strange. How would that possibly work? The way the dynamic works is a parent might have sold a house in a community, moved away, their kids still live in the community, and when the time for this decision comes, mom's moving back from Delaware or up from the Cape to, wherever, Newton. And so there is this, you don't want to rely too heavily on it, but there is really now data that some of these people were right, that there's a draw being able to come back to the town that you lived in until you retired and moved away is a phenomenon that happens. So we do increasingly have to look at sort of what's the 45 to 60-year-old population in a community look like. Are they maybe the kind of adult children that would be helping their parent move back to town? So that number's starting to go from 10 to maybe 20 or 25% in some studies.
I think it's fascinating, the 5 to 7 mile radius. What's that based? Is that something that's kind of been a standard for years, or is that something that's kind of evolved? I mean, and tell me a little bit about that, Tom. What's
that's sort of a starting point rule of thumb. In some markets, it might be a 3 to 5 mile radius. In some markets, it might be a 15 to 20 mile radius, depending on how densely developed it is. To Peter's earlier point, we look at a combination of qualified seniors, age and income qualified, as Peter suggested. We also do look at qualified caregivers, and they tend to be 55 to 64-year-olds, given the average age at entrance for us. And we find it varies from market to market, but there's absolutely a significant part of our market that are people who are moving in from out of the area to be near their adult children, which is why we look at the number of adult children. So we look for markets that have a concentration of qualified seniors, qualified caregivers, and home values. And then one of your earlier questions is why there might be a project or market where there's 2 or 3 communities, and we might look to build another one. In some cases, it's pretty easy. If some of the existing communities are all assisted living, for example, and none offer Alzheimer's care, well, that's an easy analysis. Or conversely, they may be independent living with assisted living, or there's different ways to position things. And also there are different ways that, even within a given town, if you're on one side of town, you might draw from the neighbor to the west. If you're on the other side of town, you might draw from the neighbor to the east. And so I think it requires again that very local look and very local understanding about how the market works.
so the theory is that
I
people
just want to add one
Go
quick
ahead.
thing. I'm not an expert at locating senior care facilities by any stretch. But one thing that we're seeing as of late is, and I'm not sure if this is a trend, this is really more of a question, is we're in a pre-construction for a couple of facilities that seem to be near college campuses. So, that's something that we didn't see, 10, 15 years ago, where now we're seeing more of a communities that are being built and to almost share resources. So maybe that's something that seems to be trending in that direction.
Where are those projects?
They're out in the western part of the state.
And what's the synergy there with the college? It's interesting. With
I think it's called, from what I understand, it's sharing resources. Colleges, obviously they have libraries, they have guest lecturers. This is just the conversations I'm having with the operators. I think it's technology driven. And what they're finding is, in terms of many of the seniors, is they're certainly not ready to quote unquote retire. That they still want to be actively involved and learn and educate themselves. So they want to take advantage of the programs that the schools offer, and they find that that's a big attraction to many of these older adults.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Last night I went to my 6th grade daughter's back to school night in Weston, and I was there 6 years ago with my son, and the entire school system has totally changed in terms of technology. No textbooks, everything iPad, every kid has an iPad, everything is electronic. And also we have seen in our own homes the size of television, the computers, the wireless, all these things have changed. Is this type of trend is being reflected in the design and in the senior housing industry, and how you guys are coping, how the architects are coming with those type of ideas? If you can talk about that.
I can start. I mean, technology, people think of technology is wireless communication, but what we're seeing in terms of contractors and designers is the safety and security systems have evolved tremendously over the past several years. I mean, we're putting in systems that monitor medication, how often a person needs to take medication. We're putting in systems that they look like pendants. If a resident happens to fall, it sends off a signal. Obviously, traditional technology systems like wireless is much more prevalent today than it was 10 or 15 years ago. But they have some of the facilities that were built at business centers that you can go and so yeah, it's definitely a trend. It's similar to people's homes. You know, my kids don't leave the room without hanging onto their iPhone or whatever else the device they have. It's the seniors are the same way. I mean, it seems like it's
But we're absolutely, we put Wi-Fi in all of our buildings a couple of years ago, and that's a sort of base expectation. We've done all the sort of monitoring. Actually, our newest community in Shelton is, we think, one of the most advanced technologically in the country. We've got a team up with Stanley Black & Decker to put in, there's real-time monitoring of where our residents are, so if somebody gets an emergency call, we know exactly in the building where they are. We've got all kinds of, I think what's really going to, where the real action is going to be is on the operating side. It's things like electronic medical records, which are very expensive to put in place. There's some really, there's a ton happening in the technology for seniors area. Our attitude is we don't want to be the pioneer, the first out there, but we need to be, our village, having Wi-Fi that sets us up to be a platform for interesting things to come along. But there's a lot happening in the world of technology for seniors, and that's absolutely something we need to be prepared for. And it'll help operations, it'll help the residents, it'll help ultimately staffing and so on.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Right now, the technology is sort of an infrastructure for us as on the operating and building side. I think we don't see our consumer quite there yet. You know, my mother sends me an email and I say, stop doing this, call me on the phone, you know. So our 88-year-olds are not there yet, but I think to Tom's point about the beginning of the baby boom, you know, as time goes on, these will be people that get their morning paper on their tablet and talk to their doctor via the email. So that sort of coming, I don't think it's quite gotten to us yet, other than the here and there person who is technologically advanced for an 80-year-old. But that's definitely coming. And that's one of the things we have to think about is the difference between today's consumer and when you look at a 65-year-old now. I know I look at it and go, I'm never going to be able to keep these people happy. It will have to do a couple of more evolutions to be a product that the current 65-year-olds find a good value, a good investment proposition, and the right solution to them as sort of healthcare changes and it becomes more accessible to them now. And who knows where it'll be in 10 or 15 years. So we have to keep our eye on that.
One last question, I'm going to open it up for questions, but what about home values? They've clearly been on the tear here, and especially in the Boston area, big increases in home values. How has that helped your development activities? Has that really been a key part of it, or were you, how's that played into what you're able to do now?
I'll just have a quick, I think for us, home values for a straight up assisted living rental sort of development, they're interesting. They help a potential consumer be able to pay for assisted living out of a combination of income and assets. I think they're much more an element of the economics of a project in things like CCRCs, where people are selling homes, buying into another real estate investment. So we haven't seen our market as the number, and you're right, locally we've been pretty steady, but even in other parts of the country where housing values took pretty big hits, I don't think they saw that translate so much into the rental assisted living market, because that's a need-driven market, and if you sell your house for $275,000 or $235,000 for the senior, they need to sell their house, they need to go somewhere for services, and I don't think it affected it too much, but I think on the CCRC it's had a little bit more of an impact and is a positive thing currently.
How about you, Tom?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's been a helpful factor.
Yes.
I wanted to open it up for questions here and jump in and start.
Yeah, I'm interested, Tom, in your comment about trying to increase the percentage of penetration. Here in Massachusetts, we've had the benefit of actually you two organizations being the pioneers, really, of assisted living, here in Massachusetts, and it having been a recreational or a hospitality platform, and the tendency has been home to maybe downsizing to an assisted living to eventually a nursing home, that kind of thinking. But with healthcare, there's a lot more bouncing around. And in other states, I've seen assisted living start to have rehab components to it, and that I haven't seen here in Massachusetts. And I'm wondering if the part of the strategy of maybe expanding the model might be something other than what's going on right now. Are you thinking about any of that?
I think there's a number of ways that the industry can increase the penetration among the senior population. One is certainly by being able to offer a greater array of services. Massachusetts has this residential model that is in most ways served us very well. But the trick is that now what's been happening is that folks are getting older and frailer upon entry, and the need for services is greater. So my view is that we need to give providers the option to be more flexible about being able to provide more services so people can remain in their assisted living communities. That's one small way of doing it. Another way of doing it isn't necessarily specific to assisted living, but is how to make senior living not feel like the ghettos for seniors, and how do we make it not have the stigma of I don't want to go to the old folks home, and so to take the word senior out of it and so on. There's a whole lot of thinking about that I think is being more relevant for the coming generation, as Peter said. I think the technology, we have a huge target on our back, which is that there's a lot of money being invested in technology to allow people to stay at home. Most people would prefer to stay at home. Right now, if your needs are predictable, that's easier to do. Once your needs become unpredictable, it's very hard to do, or at least on a cost-effective basis. But there's a lot of technology efforts being done to allow people to stay at home, telemedicine, and all kinds of things that are going to affect us. So we need to be smart in thinking about how to position living in our community to be an even more attractive option, to be more flexibility with services that are provided, to have some meaningful advantages to staying at home with perhaps improved technology or other things.
Anybody else? Just following up on that question, and Tom, you're mentioning that there's still that stigma attached to senior living, or the idea that this is even a ghetto for old folks. What are some of the ideas you have on that in terms of trying to change that over time or broaden that out so that it becomes, as you're mentioning, maybe a more attractive option if somebody can say, look, I can maybe hang on to the house here, but I could afford to go to some place, but I'd rather just stay here if I can. How do you compete with that? How do you kind of make that transition?
I think it's a whole host of different things. I think changing the language about it so that it's not called senior living or things in that ilk. I think having it feel less like a segregated place. So I don't know, but today I bet 90+% of the communities in Massachusetts are 2 to 3 story buildings on 4 to 5 acre lots in the suburbs. Whereas I think the coming generation in particular, more than today's, the coming generation will want them in high-rise buildings and low-rise buildings. They'll want them downtown. They'll want them mixed use. They'll want it multi-generational. They'll want it on college campuses. They'll want it every place they want it, because then it will feel less different. It'll feel less segregated. I think it's a combination of the language, of the attitude and philosophy, of the building and the location, and it's going to be a whole comprehensive list of things to have it feel like another simple mainstream housing choice rather than, oh my gosh, the old folks home. So it's going to take a long time, and if I knew what it looked like, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. But,
Peter.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's lost the tie since I've known him. Next time he won't even be here because he won't solve that problem. But yeah, I think there are in other parts of the world, there's staff and team members of an assisted living live in the building or another part of the building, and their family lives there, and it has this community element to it. That honestly can help with some of the economics. That workforce is a real issue for us, and if we can have some solutions to workforce housing with our units where the seniors live, That might be a good solution, and it might expand. I think Tom's mentioning community. My wife says to me all the time, I still don't understand why you don't buy a block in these downtowns and build your building there so that people can visit their mother while they go as they go to the hardware store, and But it's a hard economic nut to crack. But that's where we want to be. We talk about community all the time, and what we try to do is build a community within the building we've constructed. It's not exactly the right sort of methodology. What we want to do is be the community and happen to be serving seniors at the same time, which I agree with Tom sounds way too lofty, but ultimately that's where we have to go. And we've moved that way in our 25-year history. I mean, it used to be find me 5 acres near an interchange, literally. That used to be one of the criteria. Easy off, easy on. The families will come from 50 miles away if they don't have to go much, a mile past the interchange. It's like, what? No, we actually want them to come a couple days a week with their kids. That's how we have satisfied residents. There was a national study, and the biggest indicator of resident satisfaction is the quantity of family interaction that continues once they've moved into assisted living. If their family and grandkids are still coming, they're happy, and we've done a good job. So we have to have an environment where that's actually part of our business strategy, to be part of their community rather than have them join our community. And going way, way back, that's what we do. I always say to people who don't know our business, when you were a kid and your grandmother lived in your house before she went to the nursing home? That's what, on our best days, that's what we're doing. You need to take a few medications, you need help getting dressed in the morning, you don't need to live 10 miles out on a 5-acre plot that someone could buy for, $400,000 an acre or whatever it is. So that's where you are now. I think we're going that way, and I think that is one of the advantages, I'll say, despite the article on Sunday of a regulator like the Executive Office of Elder Affairs. They're about how to increase the quality of life for seniors in Massachusetts. That's what that department does. That's what we're trying to do. So it's a very good symbiotic relationship with a regulator who is not necessarily defining how everything happens, but is almost sort of regulating by outcome. It's how do these residents get what they need in an environment that's safe and is one that they chose, not that was dictated to them because you need this, you need to live in one of these things called a nursing facility. So that is happening, and we are on that road, I think.
Yeah, and it sounds like the challenge is then, as you move forward, then just finding those sites that work economically, that can provide a sense of community, but that you can actually, but that people will still travel to. But it sounds like a very interesting goal. Anybody else want to jump in here with some questions? Or? Yes, sir.
I was just going to ask, based on economics, you mentioned economics, what does that look like for your acquisition that would make sense for a facility that you guys would do?
For land or viability? It depends on the market and what rents you think are achievable, but we're probably in the 25 to 35,000 a unit range. In some markets, it can go higher, but that's probably a pretty good average number.
Sir?
I was recently at another event similar to this. It was talking about office buildings, and they were saying the new office buildings that are constructed, even though the rents or leasing was a little bit more expensive than the newer buildings, they were finding a lower vacancy rate in those buildings because that's what the consumer wanted. Are you seeing the same, versus older buildings that are rehabbed, are you seeing the same type of play from the consumer in this?
I'd say sort of yes and no. Peter raised the point earlier about the average age of the senior living communities in Massachusetts, and that is something that the industry has to pay attention to. We invest a lot of recurring CapEx money in our buildings and to try and keep them fresh and so on. And we all have stories about the building that's sort of the older rundown building but that has a great staff that always stays full, and the brand spanking new building that doesn't have a great staff and you can never get it full. And so it's so much more about the staff and the field and the services that are provided than the building itself, but that comes to a point, I guess I'd say. So a building that's 25 years old with shared rooms and all the rest, you got to keep investing capital in it. Which, but I don't think it's maybe the office market to me is that's much more of a commodity thing where the staff doesn't really make any difference. It's really the building, it's the real estate period. That's not really the case with us.
As we wrap up here, any closing statements you want to make, or just thoughts, questions you want to, issues you want to throw out there that we haven't talked about?
I'll jump in. My partner will come in. But I think going away from something like this is, and the reason I think part of what we do, there's an economic and business element to it, but there's also this education and this awareness that we need to build of the dilemma that seniors are in and their families. When you can't live at home anymore, then what? And I think a lot of this discussion and debate is about creating better solutions for the then what question. And the article points out some shortcomings, and but at the same time, an industry that is trying to provide the service that consumers, their families, the 80-plus-year-olds have decided they need because where they are now does not work and is unsafe. That's worth a lot of time and effort to understand, so that we kind of move thoughtfully through the maturation of the product. And we're still in our infancy, and 20 years or so in the state. The regulations need to change over time. Regulators need to be tough on us, and we need to be tough on ourselves. But I think the one thing that is important is the more people who understand the issue, even though they're not at the cusp of the issue with an 85-year-old parent who needs to not go home today from the hospital. That's the introduction to assisted living for most people, is the hospital says, we're not sending you home. You've got 2 days, you're going somewhere. It's really good for everyone to know, don't just call the nursing homes, don't just call the home cares, call some assisted living too. You may be told we can't help you or we're not the right place, but know that that is in the options that are available to seniors and their families. And I think as that happens, the industry gets better, the consumers are better served, and the state moves forward from where we started in 1994 to wherever we go.
Tony, any thoughts here as we wrap up?
No, I just think that, first of all, it's a pleasure listening to these two gentlemen. And, the only thing I would say that there's a lot, from my vantage point, which is obviously the contractor, the designer's vantage point, there's a lot happening in the senior care industry. And, any owner, operator, or developer that's looking to get into the market, I can only preach whether it's Nauset construction or certainly there's a lot of other qualified, very good contractors and architects. It's good to partner with people like us, because there are a lot of new technologies, a lot of new ideas, going through a pretty intense or detailed pre-construction process. I think we learn from each other, we learn from mistakes we've made in the past, especially on CapEx projects when we're working in occupied facilities. There's a lot that we need to anticipate in terms of security and safety. So, for anyone who's looking to develop these projects, I mean, partnering with an experienced architect and experienced contractor just makes, I think, everyone's life easier in the process. And it's certainly something that I would strongly recommend going forward.
Well, a great discussion, and thank you for your great responses and insights into the industry and what's going on out there. And I'm going to turn it back over to Hendra here, but
Thank you very much for coming, and see you guys next year.
Thank you.